Hi guys, it's Aoife from Words of Clover and I'm here to do my July wrap up. Again, I had another great reading month, a real mix of different genres that I read this month, and I'm going to get straight on into it with a mystery thriller book that I read this month, and that was The Last Girl by Jane Casey. So this is the third book in the Maeve Kerrigan series, which is a crime series that I really enjoy. It is set in London, but we're following a Irish detective called Maeve Kerrigan, or she's Irish parents and she kind of Irish English, I guess. But yeah, I really love the series. I really love Maeve Kerrigan as a character. She's one of my favourite characters when it comes to kind of detective, a bit of homophobic kind of remarks now and again, and kind of derogatory terms used in this book, which I think if it was written today it wouldn't be included. I feel like some of the language in this book sometimes does date it a little bit, but I still do really enjoy the series. And as I said, this is the third book in the series, and in this one we are following Maeve as she is brought to a case where this woman and her daughter have both been really violently killed in their home. They were discovered by the other daughter of the home, and it was her twin sister who was murdered, and the father was left upstairs. He was just knocked out, he wasn't killed. So there are a lot of question marks about like who could have killed these people, why were two of the household not killed. There's some kind of touches on eating disorders with the other daughter, as well as cutting in this book as well, or self-harm, and I don't think like the self-harm is dealt with that well in terms of how the officers reacted to it, but again, as I said, I think there are some parts of this book that are slightly dated, but I did really enjoy the story. I did kind of guess halfway through who was the whodunit, and there was just one thing said that I was like, I know who it is, and I was right. And yeah, but this is just like a really entertaining series for me. I just really love following Maeve, and yeah, I just really love it as a whole. A lot of people have gone on about the Free Decline series, and this is kind of, I haven't read the Free Decline series, but this is kind of like my equivalent to that, I guess. That's why I gave this a 4 out of 5 stars. The next book I picked up was a very anticipated sequel for me, and that was The House of Fortune by Jessie Burton. This is actually set 18 years after the events of what happened in The Miniaturist, so I can't actually say too much about this book because it does spoil a lot of like what happened in The Miniaturist, but all I can say is we are following the same group of characters. We are following Nella, who is now 18 years older than like I think the 18 or 19-year-old that we met in the first book. She's now a woman in her late 30s, early 40s, like entering her early 40s, I guess, and she has had to deal with a lot. We're seeing her a lot more grown up, a lot more mature, and there are a lot of ways in which I still feel like I love Nella as a character. We saw her come to Amsterdam as a young girl, hoping for a lot of different things as a young wife, and being really disappointed in what she realised was going to be her life. And we've seen her like so much character progression in The Miniaturist in terms of how she had to kind of grow up a lot, really take charge of a lot of things, and we're seeing that continue in The House of Fortune, where she is now kind of like lady of the house. She is a leader when it comes to like the family, to this family as well. She's kind of like head of the household in a lot of ways, and we also have a young character called Tia in this, and she is 18 years old and she is living within this house as well, and we're seeing kind of Nella almost in a motherly role for Tia, and she is being, I guess, challenged a lot when it comes to Tia, and Tia has a way that she wants her life to go, and it is not the way that it's not the plans that Nella has for Tia. We also find out a lot of different things around Nella's background that we never found out in The Miniaturist, about her mother, how she grew up, and what it means for her to be looking back at her family home and potentially be thinking about revisiting it. And we're seeing a lot of like demons kind of rise up, and a lot of fears that Nella is experiencing. I really enjoyed this. I do think there were times when Nella acted in ways that I felt really disappointed with her, in comparison to when I was thinking about the young Nella in the first book, where there are also times I felt really protective of her, and when other characters weren't being very nice to her, I felt like, you know, shaking them and giving out to them, and yeah, I just wanted to protect her in this book as well. And I feel like she always deserved so much more than what she was given. I always felt really sorry for her with how things ended up in The Miniaturist, and while she did get something of what she wanted, I do think she could have gotten so much more, and I do hope like by the end of this book there is a lot more kind of hope, and you really feel like they're on like a better road for themselves, for everyone. And yeah, I really love the kind of the found family in this as well. Like everyone in this house, like they're people who are kind of brought together by circumstance, but they formed this really, really strong, lovely family unit, and a really kind of unconventional family unit for the time as well. So I really, really enjoyed that. So I gave this a 4 out of 5 stars, and I do think, like the miniaturist, this is one that I'm going to be rereading again and again and again, and just get something more out of it every single time. I picked up another sequel. This is kind of a novella, and this is A Court of Frost and Starlight by Sergey. So this is, I think, 3.5 in like the Court of Thorns and Roses series, so we're kind of like in between like wars, I guess. Like we just had a big battle in the last book, and now we're probably looking at like more battles in the following books, or more kind of strife and war and bad things that are going to be happening. And this almost feels like a kind of Christmas special in a way. It's set at a time in this world where there is a holiday that's very, very similar to Christmas, and we're seeing the characters all come together and give gifts and kind of be jolly and like, you know, but also they're still dealing with a lot of trauma and like fears and things like that about what has just happened to them and what is going to happen in the future. And we also see our main character Feyre. She is thinking a lot about things that she saw and things that were revealed to her in the last book, and things that are very much to do with her life trajectory, her role as a woman, and as a wife, and as a potential mother in the future. And we're seeing her have to come to decisions about what she wants to do with her life and how quickly she wants to do those things. Does she want to do them soon, or does she want to hold off for a few years? Which, in fairness, even though this is a fantasy book, is something that like a lot of like people have to think about in their lives. It's nice to see that kind of thing around motherhood being reflected in this book as well. So like this is a very kind of like, do you have to read this book to go on to A Court of Silver Flames? Probably not. I'm not really sure. I haven't read A Court of Silver Flames, so I don't know how much in this book kind of, you know, contributes to that. I also have this really it's probably a really unpopular opinion, because obviously a lot of the characters in this book are very, very well loved, but I just think Sarah J Maas needs to kill one of her characters off. She needs to kill one of her main characters off. Even though we love them, even though I would be devastated if that happens, I think she just needs to raise the stakes with her books, and she needs to kill someone off, because otherwise I can't take her seriously. I really, really thought someone was going to die in the last book, and they didn't, and there was like an almost death, and then like it was like, okay, whatever. But I think there are a couple of like main side characters who form like this core friendship group. I think one of them needs to die. I'm gonna say it, I think one of them needs to die. I'm not saying kill the absolute main characters, I'm saying kill the main side characters off, at least one of them. I did originally give this like a 3.5 out of 5 stars, but honestly I think I'm just going to give it 3 stars. It was fun, it was enjoyable because I like the series. I don't think it was an absolute must read, but I still did enjoy it for what it was, which was just a fun novella. I listened to an audiobook called Old Baggage by Lissa Evans. This is a really interesting book. This is set in the 1900s, following a character called Mattie or Matilda, and she is kind of an aging suffragette. She is in kind of the later seasons of her life, and as a young woman she was a very, very avid suffragette. She she protested, she fought, she was put, I think she was jailed at one point. She really fought for, you know, women's right to vote, and now she's older and she is feeling kind of like, you know, women have the right to vote if they are 30 and if they own property. If they're over 30 who own property, or married to a man who owns property, I think. Just feels like, you know, that's not enough. She still wants more, and she's kind of disappointed seeing young girls. She's not really like inspired by them in any way, and she ends up setting up this kind of like young kind of girls youth group to kind of teach them different things in terms of like wilderness survival, javelin throwing, kind of just like igniting that spark of feminism within these girls. A moment of change in the world as well, and how Mattie's kind of dealing with it all. This was just a really, really enjoyable audiobook. The narrator for this for me was a woman called Joanna Scanlon. She is also an actress, I think, and she did such a good job of narrating Mattie. Like, she literally brought Mattie to life with the voice that she used for her. It was absolutely brilliant, and because of this the audiobook was just so entertaining for me, and I was just having such a good time listening to it. I think as the story goes, like, it's not necessarily plotty, but it doesn't have lots of like twists and turns, but I think just the general kind of comedic atmosphere of it, while also like if you're kind of at all interested in suffragette movement. And I really liked this point in time and like of these people who were kind of like, well, what happens next, what do we do next? And a lot of these women who would have fought for, you know, for in the suffragette movement, and then, you know, they get married and they get older and have children themselves, and how that looks when like they all come together later on in life as well, and how maybe some of their motives or their ideals change as well as they get older. So yeah, I gave this one a 4 out of 5 stars, and yeah, I loved it. And the next book I read was a 5-star read for me. That was Lessons in Chemistry by Bonnie Garmus. This is a 2022 debut, which has already been optioned, I think, for a movie starring Brie Larson, and I cannot wait for this movie or TV show. I don't know which it is, but this is going to be really, really good. And it feels like, you know, like women in STEM / science meets WandaVision, kind of like, you know, that 50s 60s era style, housewife style of show, plus Julia Child kind of cooking channel and like television personality. Set in the late 50s, early 60s, we are following a character called Elizabeth Stott, who is this really, really clever scientist, but obviously the time period it is, she's not taken seriously at all as a female scientist, and she is treated with a lot of sexism and misogyny, and she just has to kind of like deal with it. She just has to keep going, trying to do the best she can do. She ends up falling in love with a fellow scientist, and she does, through a series of circumstances, end up being a single mother. Her struggle with trying to, you know, like just keep like a home, keep a roof over her head, being able to feed her child, to look after her child, and she ends up becoming this kind of unexpected TV star. Just assigns 2 women through like the disguise of teaching them how to cook, and it just kind of takes off and she becomes, you know, like this celebrity. This one was just really, really fun. I just thought like there were some moments of it that were really sad. There was a scene at the start that is a sexual assault that did kind of take me by surprise, so just a content warning for that. There is mention of suicide, there's some reference to domestic violence, there's death of a loved one, and then there's also a lot of misogyny, sexism in this book, a lot of gaslighting. So yeah, definitely just take that all into a warning. There's a lot of times in this book that just made me really, really angry because of the way the men were treating Elizabeth, and she was literally like the best of the lot, and she was never seen for what she could really do, and it was just infuriating to read, to be honest. But overall, I did absolutely love this book. I thought like that kind of, those heavy topics were balanced really well with like kind of a lightness and tone and the comedic atmosphere of the book as well, while also having some really, really great characters, and characters that really came alive off the page, from Elizabeth's daughter to her dog, who was called 630, who had his own little personality and was absolutely brilliant. Absolutely love this, really, really recommend it, 5 out of 5 stars. Then I finished another audiobook. This was Of Women and Salt by Gabriela Garcia. I listened to this, as I said, I listened to this on audiobook. This was okay for me. I just didn't really get what I wanted from it, I guess. This one feels like a lot of snapshots where we're following a group of women who are mostly kind of related to each other. It's kind of like a generational story in a way. We're following a group of Cuban American women as we see their experiences in Cuba and in America. We're seeing issues when it comes to addiction, and then people with issues in relation to kind of family trauma and history. We're seeing Cuban history as well, seeing a woman who is from El Salvador, and she is deported from America back to she ends up going back to Mexico because I think they couldn't be bothered to bring her, to send her all the way to El Salvador, but she's deported back to Mexico with her young daughter, and we're seeing how that story ends up as well, and how this daughter her whole life tries to get back to America. I don't know whether it felt a little bit scattered to me. There was something in the back of the book, kind of an interview with the author, where she does say that it started out as short stories, and I can definitely see that. It definitely has like a short story feel to it, and I feel like it just felt a little bit scattered. I wasn't always sure of the timeline of the book, and how exactly everything was kind of like following along. Like were we hopping back and forth, or were we kind of linear? It was kind of hard to tell. There was kind of a snapshot at the very start of the book where we're following a character, kind of the great grandmother of our main characters, in I think it was 1869 or 1860 Cuba. I really, really enjoyed that bit, and I wish we could have. I kept waiting to go back to her and we never did, and I felt really sad about that because that was my favourite one, and I would have liked to spend a lot longer in that time period with that character, because I thought she was really, really interesting. Like, these women obviously are Cuban and American, so that immigration story, particularly when it comes to like it to America and ice and the fear of that as well. And so much of that is like, while I definitely appreciate everything in this book, it's so far from what I know, and like I feel so far removed from that, being like my little self in Ireland. Learning about in this book was so far removed from what I know and from my own experience. I think I just didn't connect to it the way a lot of other readers would. So because of that, I gave it a 3 out of 5 stars. Like, I don't think it was a bad book by any means. It just didn't connect to me the way I say it connected to a lot of other people. I read Cibola Burn by James S.A. Corey. This is the 4th book in the Expanse series. As I'm going my reread of this, really enjoyed this one. Is showing people settling on a new planet that was kind of discovered in the last book. This new planet a bunch of new planets opened up to the world that we are following in this book, and we are seeing kind of this, I guess, battle, war, like argument more so, between the people who got to the planet first and started colonizing it for themselves, plus a corporation that comes in saying, oh no, like, this planet is ours and we get to do whatever we want to it, and trying to kick those people out. And then we have our main group of people who we're following throughout the whole series, who are the crew of the Rocinante, and we are seeing them being asked to be mediators basically between all of this like politics going on. And we're seeing how that all kind of ends up, and it turns out that they're kind of on a planet that is trying to kill them, so they have a lot more to worry about than just, you know, who gets to, you know, plant things, or who gets to live on this planet. It could be like no one can live on this planet. I really enjoyed this one. I gave it a 4 out of 5 stars, and I'm really looking forward to the next book, which I think was one of my favourite ones when I originally read the series, so I can't wait to get onto that. Read Nightbitch by Rachel Yoder. This is a very interesting book where it's kind of one of those ones that you're never really sure what is actually going on in it, but we're following a mother who is a stay-at-home mom. She used to be an artist, and she's really like mourning that old life of hers where she was kind of a career woman, and even though she loves her son, and she chose to give that up so she could be with her son because she didn't want to miss out on, like, you know, him growing up, she is feeling very lonely, very isolated, very overlooked in her life. Her husband kind of works away from the home for the majority of the week, so he's never there, and when he comes home at the weekend, she still ends up doing a lot of like the housework and the parenting and stuff. And like, her child is now a toddler who is like, you know, going through kind of just that really troublesome age that kids do, and yeah, she's just feeling really tired. She's feeling angry, and she starts turning into a dog. And we see how she kind of is afraid of this at first, and then she slowly starts to accept it and starts to kind of embrace this like wildness within her and this feral nature that is coming out of her, and how it ends up kind of helping her when it comes to parenting, and helps her kind of with her son, and he embraces it as well. And it's just a really interesting book. This is one that like will really work for some people and really won't for others. I really kind of enjoyed how it was just such this like big metaphor for all kinds of mothers, from mothers who have to go to work and are suffering from mom guilt and all everything that accompanies that as a working mother, plus mothers who are at home, who are stay-at-home moms, who are also working a really hard job but aren't necessarily ever, you know, not thanked for it, but acknowledged like of that hard work and how hard it is, and the fact that it is so isolating, it is so lonely, it's so hard. And yeah, they're kind of like left in the shadows and overlooked a lot of the time. I just really liked the kind of, you know, that warring nature in the character that we're following, versus, you know, like the domestic homely side of her versus this like the wild woman inside of her, and the wild dog, like the wild bitch that was inside of her. And I really liked how it all came about. It does feel like a little bit trippy at times, and you're not really sure what is going on. Is it real? Is it just like a drug-induced haze, or is it just like tiredness, like over-tiredness when it comes to the character? Yeah, it was really interesting, and I gave it a 4 out of 5 stars, with that being that like I don't think this will be for everyone. I think it's one of those ones that I can't even recommend to people. I think it's just one of those ones you just give it a go, see if it works for you, and if it doesn't, it doesn't, and if it does, that's great. After that, I picked up a book on Kindle Unlimited, and I mostly picked this up because I saw a review from Michaela over at Love Michaela Eve, and who I've been booktube friends with for a really long time. This one, I just kind of felt when I was listening to her reviews, I was like, I think I'm in the mood for just like a simple, like maybe a slightly smutty romance. And this kind of came up. It's on the whole trilogy is on Kindle Unlimited. So I read the first book, and that is Sleet Kitten by S.J. Tilley. So in this one we're following Caitlin, who's 31. First of all, really love that the character in this is in her 30s, and like the love interest, he's in his mid-30s. I just really like that they're not in like their early 20s or anything. And she ends up going to this party for her cousin, and she ends up meeting this guy there who actually owns the place that the party's at, and they have like this immediate sexual like chemistry between them. It's really, really flirty, and he ends up inviting her to his hockey game the next day. It turns out that he's like this really famous hockey player in the town that she lives in, and she goes to that, and like this whole thing is like, it's very kind of like basic, like there's not like this big thing going on in it. It's really just like these two characters who like really, really like each other, and things are going really, really fast. They don't know whether it's going too fast, if this thing is real, whether they can like trust themselves, but they just really, really like want to spend a lot of time together. So yeah, I enjoyed this one. I don't think it was absolutely amazing. There were some bits in it that kind of had me raising my eyebrows a little bit, like the first, like at the hockey game, kind of like technically their first date in a way. Caitlin ends up meeting his mom for the first time, and like their second date she ends up meeting his mom and his sister, and I was like, that would be like too much for me. Like I like you know, meeting like these really important people in his life so quickly, and like it's not like he didn't like invite them or anything. It's like kind of like they kind of barreled in, and yeah, kind of like sat themselves in on the date, and it was just like really weird, and yeah, I didn't really like that. And also one of the things, like, it's called Sleet Kitten because he gives her the nickname Kitten, so he calls her Kitten a lot. Like, that's cute, like if you do it like a few times, but when literally every single time he references her or he talks to her, he calls her Kitten, he like never ever calls her by her name, it just gave me the ick. I was like, no, like this is too much. Like you can't just keep calling her Kitten. And even when he was talking to her like about her with other people, he would still call her Kitten, and I was like, no, that's gross. Like stop, like leave it between the two of you. Do it a few times, like now and again. It's cute, it's sweet, but like not every time. But yeah, I gave this one like a 3.5 out of 5 stars, with that being that I'm looking forward to reading the next book which follows a character that we met in this book. So yeah, looking forward to that. And then I listened to my last audiobook of the month, and that was Good Girl, Bad Blood by Holly Jackson. This is the second book in A Good Girl's Guide to Murder. So we are still following Pip, who is now, I think she's like 17, 18 in this, no, I think she's 17 in this book. And she has turned what was the first book, like a school project looking into a local murder and the mystery of a local murder, she's turned that into a podcast in this book. So she's kind of become like quite well known. Her podcast has loads and loads of followers, and she's kind of like, but she's kind of traumatized with everything, how that all ended up in the first book. So she's kind of like, I never want to do anything like this again. Like that's it for me. I'm gonna, you know, focus on my schoolwork and get into college, and that's that. But then one of her best friends, his brother, goes missing, and the family come to her being like, you know, the police aren't taking this seriously. We know like you're really, really good in terms of investigating. Would you like start looking into this for us and trying to, so we can find out where he's gone, if he's alive, if he's in danger, what has happened to him. So she ends up saying yes, because like how can you kind of say no to that? And through her investigation, she ends up just like finding out a lot more about stuff that's going on in her town, things that could be really, really dangerous, and yeah, there's like, just like stakes become really, really high. I listened to this in audiobook, where the first book I read in physical format. This one I listened to an audiobook, and it was really, really good in terms of the podcast element of it. Like it's a full cast audiobook. There's loads of just like elements within the audiobook for the mixed media format that make the audiobook really, really fun to listen to. So I definitely recommend that. If people were thinking of reading this book, definitely pick up the audiobook, because it was really, really good. This is just a fast-paced, kind of really intense, like addicting. You really become really invested in the story, and I felt like that with the first book, definitely felt like this in the second book, and I really enjoyed seeing how it all ended up. I feel like this one, like the stakes were so much higher, because obviously the first book we were following a mystery that was already a few years old. Like it was clear that the people in it were dead. Like, you know, this one, because the person is missing, not found dead, not presumed dead, just missing, you don't know if he's in danger, you don't know what has happened to him. It could be a race against the clock. It does feel like quite intense in that way, and the stakes are really high, and we see Pip acting in ways that, like, you know, are almost irrational for her, because she's starting to get really scared for this guy that she's known her whole life, and what could have happened to him. We also see some fallout from the first book, in terms of things that were revealed, and how that progresses in terms of court and stuff like that as well. She does do one thing in this book that I'm like, that's a defamation case. Like, this person, even if you know that they did something, if they're proven not guilty in the court of law, technically, like, you can't really, well, in some countries, like, you can't really say too much about them. I'm kind of thinking about like just different cases that were similar in Ireland, and you can't say certain things about people because they were proven not guilty in a court of law. So when she does something in this book, I was kind of like, defamation. I'm nervous actually about the third book because I've heard from a lot of people, like seen reviews where so many people were really disappointed in the third book, and yeah, they kind of thought the first two were much better. So I'm kind of nervous to see what happens in the third book, but also I am intrigued because Pip is really Pip is going to be really traumatized in the third book from things that happen in this book. You can see it already at the very end, so I'll be interested to see how that all progresses. This is a 4 out of 5 stars. Enjoyed it. We'll be reading the third one. And my last 2 books that I read, one of these was Vita Nostra by Marina and Sergey Dyachenko. This was translated by Julia Metov-Hershey. This one is going to be a short review, guys, because this is a fantasy, an urban fantasy, translated from Russian, set in Russia. We are following a girl called Sasha who is on holiday with her mom. She ends up meeting this strange guy who kind of scares her a little bit, and he ends up asking her to do certain tasks, and she does do them, and she collects these gold coins, and he tells her, hold on to those coins, and you're going to go to this school, this college. When you finish school, this is the college you're going to go to. And she kind of doesn't really have a choice about any of this. It's kind of like a lot of fear tactics and intimidation that she ends up having to do all of these things. She ends up going to this college and starts studying, and she doesn't really know what she's studying, but she finds out that like once she kind of cracks the code, she's really good at it. And then all these crazy things start to happen to her. She starts to kind of transform into something that's not quite human, and we're kind of just following along with all of this for her 3 years in this school. And it's just like really crazy. Like I can't explain what is going on because I don't really know, but what I will say is I was really invested in her story. I wanted to see like what would happen to her, how she would succeed. The magic in this is just like, yeah, it's very confusing at times. You don't really know, like there's no explanation to it, there's no way you can explain it. I do think the translation of this is good, but I do wonder how much of the magic system maybe was lost in translation because it is so complicated and it is so weird, and like even in Russian I say it still doesn't make sense. But I enjoyed it. I gave it a 3 out of 5 stars because I feel like this is one that will become a 4 stars. But I need to sit on it. I need to see how it sits with me. I need to see how much I think about it over the next few weeks, months, you know, until the next book. The next book is out in Russian, but it's not being translated until next year. Like the translation of it isn't being published until next year. So yeah, I say these take a really long time to translate. So yeah, a 3 stars with a caveat of it that it's probably actually a 4 star, but I'm kind of waiting and seeing what happens. And then the last book I finished this month, technically I finished it today, which is the 1st of August, but I read most of it in July, so I'm counting it for my July wrap up, and that is Cumann and the Irish Revolution. And this is a non-fiction book, obviously about the Irish Revolution, and it is looking at Cumann, which was a women's organisation, a women's Republican organisation that kind of set up around the time, around maybe the 1915, 1916, it came quite like more active. And basically the women in this, they helped out with the fight for Irish freedom, the fight for Irish independence, and then they were also involved in the Irish Civil War as well. And this is just a look at how they were kind of set up, what was the start of Cumann, how they were integral when it came to the Irish fight for it, the Irish War of Independence, how they helped out when it came to the IRA with Sinn Féin, their links to both of those groups, and yeah, just like how important they were when it comes to the history of the Irish state, like the Irish Republic, and how these women helped. So yeah, I did really enjoy this one. I think, you know, if you're interested in Irish history, if you're particularly interested in the women's role within Irish history, I think this one would be a really good one for you. There's lots of like different like, you know, like well-known names that are in this book, you know, Countess Markievicz, Kathleen Clark, Eamon de Valera, Kitty Kernan. A lot of these women were like really like involved in Cumann, and yeah, I found it really interesting just for my own personal interest. And yeah, I don't think, like, I know there probably won't be a lot of like, say, like international viewers of mine who would be particularly interested in this, but I still did enjoy it, so I gave it a 4 out of 5 stars. So that is everything I read in July. Lots of books as usual. Please let me know what you guys think. Have you read any of these? Do you want to read any of them? Thank you guys so much for watching as always, and I'll see you guys again next time.